While we're on that, what is CWD? CWD. What is
Well,
it?
chronic wasting disease is um, a disease that's caused by a protein body that becomes mutated and becomes infectious. So it makes other of those prions infectious. So that means they can make, when they come in contact with that same type of protein part, they can make it infectious. It's in the group of diseases called TSEs, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. It's similar diseases in cattle or mad cow disease, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy. In sheep and goats, it's called scrapie. Um, and then the human most similar prion disease, or TSE, in humans that are similar to CWD is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD. It's unlike um, most infectious agents like viruses or bacteria or fungi or something like that. Those prions are not susceptible to vaccines or enzymes or other agents that can break it down, or even cleaning substances if it gets on stuff. And so that makes it very difficult to control once it gets in on the landscape. It takes, once a deer is exposed to it, it'll take it a few months before it will start becoming infectious, where it can infect other deer. And then it takes even longer before it will start showing any signs of being sick. So a deer may have it for a year, 18 months before it's really showing any outward signs of being sick. But it's out there walking around potentially infecting healthy deer for quite a while before it ever shows any signs of being sick. They shed those prions through saliva, urine, feces, blood, and those, anytime those prions are shed, they create a potential exposure to other animals. And so while most of the infections are from deer to deer, once it's established in a population and those deer are depositing those prions across the landscape, at watering holes or feed sites or just anywhere, then they're creating a secondary route of infection. So the other deer doesn't have to be there. They can pick those prions up if they stick their muzzle down to eat the same place that some of these other deer that are infected deposited prions. Now, whether it takes them, how many exposures it takes before they get enough to where they become infected, I don't think that's been determined. But researchers at Mississippi State have shown that those prions can be found at feeders. They can be found at scrapes or licking branches and stuff. So there's a lot of different routes for deer to potentially be exposed to CWD outside of just deer to deer contact. Again, the deer, it's 100% fatal. That doesn't mean that the deer will die. Will be found as skin and bones dead, like typically the pictures that are published of deer with CWD. That's what they show. But most of the deer that have CWD look perfectly fine because it takes that year to 18 months or longer to start showing signs of being ill. But most of the deer that get killed and get tested and are positive for CWD look perfectly fine. But there's, that disease is progressing, from the time they get it until they start showing signs. It's progressing, so it affects their central nervous system. It affects their brains. Those prions concentrate in the central nervous system and the brain, so it affects their ability to function. It affects their brain, and so they become more susceptible to other ways of getting killed. So they become more susceptible to getting hit by cars, or in areas where they have predators, become more susceptible to being killed by, coyotes or mountain lions or whatever. They also become just more susceptible to having accidents. They're just not functioning like they normally would. So you hear a lot of people say there's more deer killed, you know, by hemorrhagic disease than there are CWD. Well, that's probably true, because CWD is not found everywhere. Hemorrhagic disease is found pretty much everywhere and happens every year, and it's caused by a virus. But it doesn't. They're completely different diseases, and it's not a long term issue like hemorrhagic disease is not a long term chronic problem like CWD is, because once CWD is established, it's not going anywhere. And so what happens over time, the prevalence, meaning the percentage of deer that have it in the population, increases faster in some situations. You can implement some practices like trying to get people to harvest more deer to keep the population down. So you're potentially minimizing the amount of deer to deer interactions. So you slowing the spread of it, slowing the increase in prevalence. But once it gets to a certain point, say like 30+% of the population has it, then what these other states that have had it for decades are finding is, then you start seeing issues with population declines attributed to CWD.
Really?
They're not losing 50% of the population. It may be a 10% long-term population decline, because what happens is, because it affects their ability to do normal deer stuff, you would expect it to affect a doe's ability to raise her fawns. Now she'll still, be bred and have fawns over the 2 or 3 years that she's maybe infected, but still functioning normally. But she may be not able to function as well as she did before she got CWD, and so she's not doing as good a job as raising her fawns as she did before. Wow. And then also potentially it's going to affect the average lifespan of a deer. So where say a doe in those areas with a real high prevalence, they may have had an average lifespan of 4 years. That goes down to 3 years, and so they're not living as long, so they're not potentially having as many fawns. And so it's not going to doesn't appear that the disease will completely wipe out the population, but what they're seeing in areas such as Arkansas and like Southwest Tennessee, where the disease has obviously been there for 20+ years, based on the prevalence. There's researchers are finding that their mortality rates are increasing, or survival rates are a lot lower for deer that have CWD as opposed to deer that don't have it in their radio collar studies. So doesn't appear that Alabama's anywhere close to having those kind of prevalence rates, but over time it will continue to creep up. It's just inevitable how the disease works and how you can't get rid of it off the landscape once it's there. So it's up to the hunters and the agencies to try to do things to try to minimize or slow the risk, or slow the spread, I should say, right, and slow that increase in prevalence. So it's unfortunate that you can't get rid of it, and but there's a lot of research continuing to be done on it, trying to find out more and more things, especially like the impacts of different management approaches, what works best to try to slow the spread while also maintaining that huntable population that can keep hunters out there hunting, because that if hunters quit hunting in these areas, that's just going to increase the deer population and increase the rate of spread. So it's a double-edged sword, because it's frustrating from talking to the folks in these other states in these areas that have high prevalence rates. It's frustrating for these hunters that are trying to do their part, continue to hunt, get deer tested, and 2 out of 3 deer that they kill come back as being CWD positive, and and it's while nothing so far indicates that it can cross over into humans. It's the Centers for Disease Control recommends that if you're hunting in an area that has CWD, so like if you were hunting in Lauderdale, Colbert County, they recommend that you have the deer tested for CWD, and if it comes back as being positive, to not eat the meat. That's what they're recommending.
Right.
And so if hunters are getting to where they're reluctant to hunt because the deer they're killing, has a pretty good chance of having CWD, then that just exacerbates the problem, and it's unfortunate. But it doesn't appear that it'll completely wipe out the population, but it long term it will cause a decline to some degree.
Now, back to the spreading part, like you was talking about a doe having it and raising babies. Could that transfer to the baby as it being born from her? Or have they proven that? Or
I think what the latest shows is that I don't think they've been able to conclude that they get it in utero before they're born. But with the way it's spread, they're going to get it pretty soon after being born, just because all the interactions between the doe and the fawn, with the licking and nursing and everything else. There's a lot of exchange of saliva and whatnot. So it's they get it shortly after if they're born to a doe that has it.
Now, what about predators spreading it? So
the research that's been shown is it doesn't appear to infect the predators, but they can. Those prions can, at least a percentage of them will go through the gut of those predators, and so they can deposit in their feces.
Wow.
And so whether it's a substantial risk or not is debatable, just because they don't, like a coyote, a scavenger. That's probably more of a risk, where they're scavenging either part from where hunters kill deer or deer. They find deer that have died and they eat it and it ends up being a CWD positive deer. They're not depositing their feces in the same spot day after day. Now they'll put it on the roads, and stuff like that pretty close. But that's probably not as concentrated a dose, if you will, of the prions as, say, around a mineral lick or a watering hole or a feed or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a potential risk, but it's not.
But it could spread like that.
Yeah, or like it, even it's potentially anytime there's prions put out there.
It goes in the ground. It stays on the ground.
It stays there in that top layer of soil, and it can be uptaken by plants. And so there's a lot of potential other routes of potential infection that they haven't.
So you're saying if a plant absorbs that?
Yeah, a plant can take it up. They've shown that in ag crops out in the
Midwest,
out west, where they've been looking at it. So
what about they still have that program where they feed them eagles them dead deer? Could that transfer the same way?
They've quit doing it.
Okay.
They, at least last I remember, they quit.
Well, that's good. Well, that is a potential.
Because they were picking up roadkill deer close to where the sites were and putting it in there. But it's I think I don't think they did it at Oak Mulgee the last couple of years, which is one of the sites that they were trapping and radio transmitting eagles over the last quite a few years, and so golden eagles.
Yeah.
And so
I was wondering about that part, if it could transfer just to the ground a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, what about, you said, like, if one dies and its carcass has been say demolished into water, because water carry that, and just because they've had some crazy jumps, like it pops up here and it's never been even close to it.
I wouldn't think it would be a high enough. Again, I'm not the expert by any means. I wouldn't think that would be a high enough concentration of prions because you mentioned earlier about I forgot what you were referring to, like spitting in the ocean.
Yeah.
You putting those prions, which they're concentrated in that spinal cord and brain, you're putting that into a creek or a river, and it just, as it goes down creek, it's magnified or diluted, not magnified. But the probably the biggest risk with with deer carcasses or dead animals is probably from disposing of carcasses from, say, you're hunting you go hunt. And it's one reason that they have the primary reason that they have the transport rules they have with, they started out on out-of-state deer coming into Alabama where it had to be deboned and no whole heads is because you kill an elk or a mule deer or a whitetail or something that has CWD in another state and bring it back and process it at home and then throw the bones and skull or whatever else leftover parts out somewhere. You might throw it out in your back 40. You can take it and throw it out on national forest, and people do that year after. They go hunt those areas year after year after year, and if they're not getting their deer tested, they don't know what they're doing. And so potentially that definitely could be a route of infection in new areas, or a processor or a taxidermist that gets deer from out of states, and now those rules have changed, so the risk is greatly reduced because if they follow the state's laws or regulations, then they're leaving those high risk parts where they found them. Right. And so the best way to avoid any of that, even if within the state, if you do your own deer and are processing your own deer and disposing of those waste parts, ideally you would bury it on the site where you killed it, or you could potentially bag it and have it taken to a landfill and buried at the landfill. Probably the least desirable, but also probably a lot better option than just throwing it out wherever is to take it back to the property where it was killed and you can just dispose it on top of the ground. Now, if a deer had CWD, it's on that area, it's in that area, it's already present on the landscape. So putting those parts back out there is not significantly increasing the likelihood of a deer catching it there. He's still more likely to pick it up from another deer, but that's better than potentially putting a CWD positive carcass out, from that was killed in County X and putting it out somewhere in County Y and potentially creating a new exposure.
Well, as of right now, they're like you said, there was no potential for any some kind of crazy vaccine or no cure. So
no, just because of how the prions are, they've been researching, prion diseases in livestock and humans for decades, way before CWD was known, and so.
Well, CWD basically was like 1968 or 69
67 is when they first figured something was they identified a malady going on with some deer in a research facility in Colorado, and then it was described as a TSE shortly after that, and then I guess it showed up in the wild in I think it was the early 80s.
Well, so if scrapies is similar, they kind of pretty much eliminated it, right?
Well, it doesn't. I don't think it kills the sheep and goats, but they've known about it for hundreds of years,
right? And
so it affects, and it's transmitted differently. I think it's sexually transmitted actually, but I may be wrong on that. But
it's actually like a different type of disease.
Yeah, they've known it's caused by prions, and it's considered a TSE, but it doesn't affect them, and that's like we're talking about the risk of humans contracting it. That's from hearing some stuff from some researchers that have been looking at those things. One of the things is to consider is like, all right, if it does cross over, how's it going to manifest in humans? What's it going to look like? It may not look like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, the human TSC. It may be completely different symptoms and stuff. So but as of now, it's not.
Well, there's been so many people. I mean, like we've been going to Wyoming for a long time. I've been hunting in the CWD zone, and I think I've had one deer tested.
Yeah.
So most people don't test them.
And the thing with the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, it just occurs spontaneously in a really low it's like one every so many million people will get it. So if there was a very slight uptick in the occurrence of that disease in the public. It'd be hard to figure out exactly if it was an uptick or just there was 3 people or 5 people got it this year instead of 4. Is that just a blip, or is it something? And so they've been looking at the occurrence of those type diseases in areas where CWD's been known to be around for a little while, and I don't think there's anything conclusive have been drawn from any of that, but nothing out there so far indicates that it has crossed. It seems to be a pretty species specific disease, but those, like with most of the infectious agents that cause disease, they're always mutating and changing. So you never say never with that. You just gotta be aware of what the potential could be and make sure you're doing what you can to make sure you're avoiding any issues.
Well, what about, is there a chance that some deer are just basically immune to that, or?
They've shown that there's some deer that are more resistant to getting it. They will get it, but it takes them longer to show symptoms, and so they still will get it, and it still will die, but it takes longer for it to affect them. And so there's not any deer, not any whitetails or anything that I'm aware of that they've shown are immune to it for sure. They just have a delay. They have a delayed. There's some genotypes that are it impacts them quicker, and then there's some that will get it, and the symptoms and ultimate fatalities are delayed.
Well, I read something that were some deer breeders or something, and I thought I read where the state was thinking about releasing some kind of deer that they think that
and so what that would do is they would get it, but they would live longer.
Okay.
And so it's that was I think it was it Oklahoma? I think that was pushing
something like that.
And the breeders are very strong in Oklahoma, so just take that for what it's worth. So.
But is there a potential for some kind of strain of deer or some kind of bioengineered deer to be immune to it, or whatever you think?
I don't know. I don't think so. And like I said, it's not the end of deer hunting. It's just that the management approach would be a little bit different. And once it gets to those really high prevalence rates, it becomes a whole lot tougher to raise deer to 4 or 5 years old. So that will be a challenge. And then you won't need to take as many does to keep the population at a level compatible with the habitat, just because they're not living as long and potentially not having as many fawns. And so there's it doesn't appear that it's the end of things. It's just that the problems become people are less likely to hunt those areas, and so the deer will still be there. They can still be managed to for the most part like they have been. Just they won't quite live as long, but hunters will be resistant to hunt there just because they don't want to hunt an area where CWD's at, and the hassles that are the perceived hassles that's associated with it, with rules that are in place that they might not agree with or not want to deal with, like with maybe mandatory testing or no baiting, no feeding, that kind of thing, and then also like I mentioned earlier about the potential of killing a deer or two that year and then it coming back positive and you're not able to eat it, because a lot of most people that are deer hunting, that's a big part of hunting is to get that venison and eat it. And so if you're putting all those resources into hunting and managing properties and whatnot, and you 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 of the deer you kill is positive or higher. I know, talking to folks that work in Mississippi, they've had some folks that they just are right in the middle of the hot zone, and they'll have 2 out of 3 deer end up being positive, and so that becomes that'll
that's a problem.
That makes it you quickly lose your enthusiasm about going hunting. in those areas.
In fact, I talked to a guy I met somewhere, and he was somewhere he lived. I think he said in Tennessee that 2 out of 3 that he killed this year had it. So,
and then you hopefully you don't quit hunting completely. You just maybe end up going hunting somewhere else, but because that hunting it, you don't want to see it going away for sure. Want people to keep hunting for various reasons.
Well, all the doom and gloom, whatever. But the biggest, like my lifetime, like your lifetime, that like we might not even see it in these counties down here, but we never know.
Yeah. I don't think we'll, and I just don't think it'll be based on what appears to have happened in other states. It'll probably be 20 plus years before you're even seeing things close to being to the levels where it's significantly impacting populations in Lauderdale, Colbert County, where we know it's at now. But you just never know where it's liable to show up in the state. The state's been doing surveillance for it, but
they don't cover
when you
everything.
Don't
stop them from walking across the lines. And
you think about the number of deer that you would have to sample to say, you have a 95% confidence that it's only occurring that it doesn't occur in X percentage of the population. You'd have to sample a lot of deer.
Right.
It's just like in Georgia. They found their first positive way over northeast of Valdosta, which is significantly further from that positive in Florida, which that's probably, if I had to guess, they probably thought, well, if we find it, it's going to be kind of like with Alabama. If we find it, it's going to be close to where those positives are in the adjoining state. It's going to be close for Georgia. It's going to be close to the one that Florida found in northwest Florida. That's why Alabama was sampling like we were sampling in Lauderdale, Colbert, and Franklin counties prior to finding it, was because of what they were finding in Mississippi and Tennessee.
Yeah.
When you're talking about CWD, there's a lot of different holes you can go down. You start talking about different scenarios about, well, what if this, what if that? And unfortunately, because the disease is so slow progressing, and it takes a while to spread and increase to levels where research seems to indicate there's some long-term impacts on the populations. It takes a while for those kind of that kind of research to be done. But fortunately, there's a lot of good research, or a lot of new research. I think it's about to come out of Arkansas. They've got some good stuff where they've been doing in northwest Arkansas, where they have some pretty high prevalence rates. It should be published here shortly, showing the impacts of that disease once it gets to those high prevalence rates. It's not good from what I've been told. The outlook's not too good, but it's to be expected when you're talking about certain areas having 40+% of the adult population having it. So
wow.
You got the same thing going on in that north central Mississippi, southwest Tennessee, right in the heart of where that really high prevalence of CWD is. Same thing in West Virginia, where they've had it for 25 years. In Wisconsin just published some stuff. They've just published some stuff showing some significant impacts on the population in that south central, I guess, part of Wisconsin, where they found it back in 2001, 2002. So,
yeah, that's like one of the main hubs where it come from for people hunting there for trophy hunting and stuff, I guess. So that's
it's gotten pretty ugly up there. From you look at the prevalence rates of the percentage of deer that are positive that are tested, of the hunter harvested deer that are tested up there is pretty high in those hottest areas.
Well, let's kind of go off that doom and gloom subject, because that's. But anyway, people. It's good to kind of be aware of it, and know of it. So hopefully, with this new technology or whatever coming out, something might. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, But again, it's something we got to live with for sure.
Yeah, and it's not. It's like again, it's not the end of deer hunting in those areas. It's just you may have to change your mindset on how you're going about it. Right. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, and to do what you can to help agencies when they're trying to come up with the best approach to keep it from impacting more hunters than it has to.
Hey everybody, thank y'all for watching the videos. Well, again, we appreciate y'all's support. If you haven't liked, please like and subscribe. And don't care if you haven't got one of our books, check out Amazon and get a book. Also, we got a link on there where you can, on our YouTube channel, where you can go on. We got a little store set up. Like if you're interested in any kind of merchandise, shirts and stuff, you can check that out. And we really appreciate anything like that. So again, we appreciate y'all's support. Keep watching. We're gonna keep trying to share the outdoors and how we do things, and try to help everybody that we can enjoy the outdoors. And we do this for just basically because of the environment and the community that's involved and built around hunting. So again, we appreciate y'all. Like, share, and we'll see y'all again.